20 years ago, my parents went to a craft fair and bought the best wooden cooking spoon I've ever used. It's thin, light, and ergonomic, it's not too big for cooking individual portions, and it's sanded smooth so it doesn't give me sensory issues. I have wanted to steal this spoon from their kitchen since the day I moved out, and I can't, because they also like cooking with it or something. So after years of trying to find something similar and making do with subpar spoons that are too thick or too thin or too rough or allegedly carcinogenic, I realized I could probably just make one. Now hear me out, this part was supposed to be a joke. I was gonna dig around in the firewood pile, not find anything, then just go to the store and buy some wood instead. But then I found this beautiful piece of maple, and I mean, look at it. It's so shiny and figured, it's basically free, so I have to at least try to make a spoon out of this. But first I want to make sure there's enough wood here. Looks like the spoon fits on it, that's a good start, and even though there are no flat edges, after measuring with the calipers, it looks like there should be just enough. Hopefully that remains the case after I bring it into the shop, trip on a poorly placed folding chair real quick, and then start flattening the workpiece on the joiner. This first flat edge revealed the first problem with this wood, these little black holes. I had to look this up, and it turns out they're caused by beetles which burrow into the wood and introduce a fungus which causes this silvery color. It's called ambrosia maple, and it's still food safe, but I'll need to exclude the beetle holes so that food scraps don't get stuck in them. And that's not the only problem, because once I get this board down to the right thickness, there's still this rough section where there isn't enough material. That limits where I can trace an outline, and so does this gross looking line on the other side. Even if this is food safe, it just looks unappetizing, and I wouldn't want to cook with it. And finally, there's this crack in the end of the board which further limits where I can place the outline. None of this really inspires confidence, so it's back to the wood pile to find a bigger piece of firewood with similar figure, which will hopefully have more usable material to work around any cracks. And after a bit more time at the planer, I get a flat side on it. But while it does look pretty cool, on closer inspection it's got all these little holes in it, which couldn't possibly make for a food-safe surface. And that doesn't inspire confidence either. So back to our first piece. After trimming and sanding the end to get a better look, I can see that the crack doesn't go through the entire board. That means I might be able to fit the spoon bowl under here while still avoiding all the gross stuff. So I trace the spoon face down on this side, since I'll have to make mine right-handed, then cut it out on the bandsaw. The first thing I want to do is see if the crack in the beetle hole can actually be carved out. There's no sense in working on the rest of the spoon if either of these two issues is going to ruin it, so I start carving to see how deep this thing goes. Now I could have bought a better knife for this, but I honestly enjoy whittling with the utility knife I just had lying around. A more expensive tool may have worked better or kept an edge longer, but I'm interested in finding out where the line is between wanting a fancy tool and really needing a fancy tool. I have a hunch that the average person with average tools can make pretty much anything. It might take a long time or more than one attempt, but it's not impossible. And the best way to figure out if that's true is to just start trying to make things, so here we are. Anyway, you may have noticed that this crack hasn't disappeared and I'm running out of excess wood to remove, so this piece just isn't going to work, and that means it's time to give up on firewood. So I dug around in the cardboard box that passes for a scrap bin around here and found another piece of maple. It has just as much flame figure as the first piece, maybe even more. There are no cracks in it, which is a relief, and the only issue is that it's not perfectly square, but it's more square than any of the other pieces were when I started, so compared to prepping the firewood, this is pretty easy. I get it just flat enough that I can hold the spoon down and roughly trace an outline, then take it to the bandsaw to cut out. Just to be safe, I measure it with the calipers, 11mm at the edge, 15mm at the bowl, so I'm good to start carving. And yeah, this took a while. For some reason, this piece is very hard and dense, even more than the maple firewood. This could be where expensive carving knives have an advantage, or maybe this is just how wood carving goes in general, or maybe my utility knife blade was a bit dull by now and I forgot to swap it. We just don't know. I also quickly figured out that I have to rotate the workpiece constantly because the wood only likes to be carved from certain directions. Basically, I want to avoid cutting in between two of the annual rings in the wood, otherwise it can risk splitting. So at points where the grain direction changes, I also have to change the direction I carve from, otherwise I might take a bigger chip than I want to and leave behind a rough surface that ends up needing more attention. Now that the back of the spoon is taking shape, I want to finalize the outline. The proper way to do this would be to trace the original face down and cut out a pattern and flip it over and transfer it to the new spoon, but honestly that sounded like a lot of work. So instead I just kind of held up the original spoon and traced it as well as I could, then double checked my work by measuring the bowl on the original and marking the same dimensions on the new one. Once that's done, I just carefully carve the outlines on the bowl and do the same on the handle. And while I was carving, I started to wonder, why this spoon? Is this particular design really that perfect, or is it just what I was used to? It was the spoon I used when I was first learning how to boil my own mac and cheese. So does the spoon fit my hand, or does my hand fit the spoon? Would someone out there prefer a completely different cooking utensil for the exact same reasons that I prefer this one? And if I preferred that different spoon, would I still be the same person? I don't know. Anyway, after about half an hour of carving, you can see side by side that the new spoon is looking pretty good. But now I have to hollow out the bowl, and I've reached the limit of what my utility knife is able to accomplish. To carve a curved surface, I'll need something with a curved blade, like this rusty old gouge I found hanging up on the toolbar. After the rust is removed, it does actually look like good steel, it just needs to be sharpened. Now you can buy stones that are specifically made for sharpening curved tools, but it seems silly to go out and buy a set just for one project. So instead, I used the flat stones we already have and just rocked the cutting edge back and forth with each pass to hopefully get the same effect. Once the coarse stone has sharpened the edge evenly, I move on to this fancy diamond stone for a bit, then some 2000 grit sandpaper, which I'll also wrap around a drill bit and use to deburr the inside of the gouge before polishing the cutting edge on a leather strop. All this gives a surface I can see my reflection in, so this should be sharp enough to carve with. It's also definitely sharp enough to cut my fingers, so I clamped down the workpiece for safety, then began to define the outer edge of the spoon bowl. I'm carving from all different directions here, which is again to avoid splitting. It's the same concern from before with the annual rings, except now it's in 3 dimensions. And because the flame figure is caused by wavy wood fibers, it means the grain is constantly changing direction. The thinner the wood gets, the more likely a split is to ruin the entire spoon, so I had to avoid this by going very slowly, paying attention to how the wood reacted to each cut, and keeping the gouge as sharp as possible so that I'm slicing the wood fibers instead of ripping through them. After a while of this, I realize I'm going to have to measure the thickness of the wood inside the bowl, but my calipers can't do that. So when it starts to look pretty close, I just take it out of the clamp and feel it side by side with the original. I did this until I was worried about going too thin, then kept it out of the clamps and carved freehand, holding the gouge up by the tip for more control. Since filming this video, I've bought a very small spoon carving knife for detail work like this, and it's very helpful, especially around the edges, but at the time I didn't have that, so I just went very slowly so as not to cut myself. Once the bowl is getting close, there's one last thing to address. The handle of the original spoon isn't uniformly thick. Using a straight edge, I can see that there's a pretty large gap here to give it that ergonomic feel I like so much, while the front of the spoon remains fairly flat. So I measure this thickness with the calipers and compare it to the spoon in progress as I cut down the handle. But honestly, I'm getting so close to finishing the spoon now that I just test how it feels in my hand from time to time. The original handle could stand to be a bit thicker, so it's less about copying that exactly and more about finding what's most comfortable for me. And with that, the overall shape of the spoon has been finalized, but the surface still has all these tool marks and rough patches that need to be smoothed out before I can actually use it. So first I tried using a belt sander. Some people say not to do this. They'll leave their hand-carved spoons more rough so that you can see the individual knife strokes. They claim that a really sharp blade leaves behind a finer surface than sandpaper can, and they're technically right about that. But they also say that sanding your spoons only means you couldn't get it right with the knife, and that's just silly. I've seen some of these rougher spoons in shops, and while they can be pretty, I wouldn't be caught dead cooking with them. Maybe I'm just neurotic, but a surface that's not perfectly smooth just doesn't feel like it can be cleaned effectively, and they're not as pleasant to hold and use. Since I'm making a tool for cooking and not a decoration for house guests to admire, I want this spoon to be as smooth as glass. That said, while the belt sander was useful for leveling the back of the spoon, the best tool for smoothing out the curved surfaces, especially inside the bowl, turned out to be this thing, a scraper. It may just look like a flat piece of steel, and that's because it is. It's made into a cutting tool by squaring and polishing the edge, then burnishing it to form a small hook. As you push the scraper across the surface of the wood, this hook grabs material and takes a very thin shaving. All this means it cuts a little faster than sandpaper, leaves behind a finer surface, and makes less of a mess. Plus, the curved side approximates the shape of the spoon bowl pretty well. There's also another scraper with a concave edge that fits the back profile of the bowl, so I use both of these to dial in the final shape of the spoon without having to worry about splitting or chipping the wood. And now the final step is hand sanding. This is the slowest part of the process, and some people consider it woodworking heresy, but honestly it's the only way to get the smoothness I'm after. So I trade off between scraping, sanding, checking the differences between my spoon and the original, then marking where I need to take it down with a pencil before scraping and sanding some more. Now, some people might look at this teeny tiny little chip and say, it's close enough. And to those people I say, what part of smooth as glass did you not understand? So I do more sanding, then wash and dry and sand and wash and dry and sand and wash and dry and sand until all the chips are gone. Then it's just a coat of mineral oil and the spoon is finally done. So what did we learn? Well, first of all, I learned that I can make my own wooden spoon. It took a few hours, but it works well enough for cooking mac and cheese, so that's all I really need. I also learned that I can make a lot of other spoons because I did. I made this one, and this one, and this one, and these left-handed ones with the handle turning the other way, and some longer ones to switch things up a bit, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. I also learned why spoons like this aren't made commercially. It would be kind of tricky to make this on a CNC machine, and they take a long time to carve by hand. I have sold a few of them at craft fairs, but after carving this many, I've started giving them to my friends and family as birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, wedding gifts, and one time as an Arbor Day gift. And I made these for myself out of a piece of black walnut from a tree that fell in my childhood backyard many years ago. But if I'm gonna sell them, they have to be like $50. And that's the reason all those subpar spoons exist. They're cheap. You can spend $5 and get a spoon that does technically work. Not everyone is going to seek out something better because not everyone cares enough to spend $50 on a cooking spoon. Unless you're me, in which case you care enough to spend hours learning how to carve your own spoon, which honestly was worth it because at this point I don't really cook with anything else. Except when I need like a spatula or tongs or something.